What if I told you that a single moment of courage could completely change the trajectory of two lives forever? That a working-class father, struggling to make ends meet, would cross paths with one of the wealthiest women in the country, and their encounter would challenge everything we think we know about class, privilege, and human decency. This isn't another fairy tale about the rich helping the poor. This is the raw, unfiltered story of David Martinez, a 34-year-old construction worker from Detroit who was just trying to survive another day when fate threw him into a situation that would test every moral fiber of his being. Picture this: a man who clips coupons to buy his daughter's school supplies, working overtime on weekends just to keep the lights on, suddenly finding himself face to face with a woman whose monthly shopping budget exceeds his yearly income. But when danger struck, when genuine evil reared its head in broad daylight, all those differences melted away in an instant. David had every reason to walk away, every logical excuse to mind his own business. He had a daughter to think about, bills to pay, and a life that couldn't afford complications. But sometimes the heart overrules the head. Sometimes doing what's right costs more than we can afford to pay, yet we pay it anyway. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a collision of two worlds that should never have met. A chain reaction that would expose the best and worst of human nature, and ultimately prove that character isn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the choices you make when no one is watching. Victoria Sterling thought she knew everything about the world below her ivory tower. She had her charities, her fundraisers, her carefully orchestrated acts of philanthropy that looked good in magazines. But she had never looked genuine desperation in the eye. She had never seen a father work 3 jobs just to afford his child's medicine. She had never witnessed the quiet dignity of someone who refuses to break, even when life keeps dealing them losing hands. And David, he thought he understood how the other half lived, the people who hired him to fix their problems, then disappeared behind their tall gates and tinted windows. He thought he knew about their indifference, their casual cruelty, their complete disconnection from real struggle. But he was about to learn that sometimes wealth can't protect you from the things that matter most. Sometimes money can't buy you the one thing you desperately need. The events that unfolded on that ordinary Tuesday morning in an upscale neighborhood would challenge every assumption both of them had about each other's world. It would force them to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, prejudice, and the invisible barriers that separate us from one another. But more than that, it would prove that heroism doesn't come with a price tag, that integrity can't be bought or sold, and that sometimes the person you least expect to save your life is the one who ends up saving your soul. So before we dive into this incredible true story, I want you to ask yourself, what would you have done? When faced with a choice between safety and sacrifice, between self-preservation and standing up for what's right, which path would you have chosen? Because David Martinez's answer to that question didn't just save a life, it revealed the profound truth that in a world obsessed with what divides us, the most powerful force of all might just be our shared humanity. This is his story. This is her story, but most importantly, this is a story about all of us, and the extraordinary things that happen when ordinary people refuse to be ordinary. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. David Martinez rolled over, his back aching from yesterday's work installing drywall in a downtown office building. The small apartment was quiet, except for the gentle breathing coming from the bedroom next door, where his 8-year-old daughter Emma slept peacefully. David had learned to move quietly in the mornings. Emma needed her sleep, especially with her asthma acting up lately. The medication was expensive, even with insurance, and he'd been picking up extra shifts wherever he could find them. Today was different, though. Today, he was starting a new job in Bloomfield Hills, one of Detroit's wealthiest suburbs. The pay was better, but it meant a longer commute and being away from Emma for extended hours. He made coffee in the small kitchen, the machine gurgling to life as he prepared Emma's lunch. Peanut butter and jelly again, but he'd managed to find strawberry jam on sale last week, so at least there was some variety. He left a note on the refrigerator. "Good morning, sunshine. Mrs. Rodriguez will pick you up for school. Love you more than all the stars. Dad." The drive to Bloomfield Hills took 45 minutes in early morning traffic. David's pickup truck, a 15-year-old Ford with over 200,000 miles on it, wheezed up the hills as he entered a world that might as well have been on another planet. Massive homes sat behind elaborate iron gates, their manicured lawns stretching like green carpets toward houses that could fit his entire apartment building inside them. The address led him to a sprawling estate that took his breath away. The house was a modern architectural marvel, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows, probably worth more than he'd earn in several lifetimes. A circular driveway curved around a fountain that looked like it belonged in a museum. David parked his battered truck next to a row of luxury vehicles and felt suddenly self-conscious about the rust spots and the duct tape holding his side mirror in place. The job was a bathroom renovation in the guest wing. Nothing major, just updating fixtures and tiles, but the materials alone were worth more than his monthly rent. As he unloaded his tools, David tried not to think about the irony. Here he was, a man who had to budget for toilet paper, installing a toilet that cost more than his truck. The project manager, a stern-faced man named Carl, walked him through the specifications. "The owner is very particular," Carl warned. "She's had issues with contractors in the past, so keep your head down, do the work, and don't make any unnecessary conversation if you encounter her." David nodded. He was used to being treated as invisible by wealthy clients. Sometimes it was better that way, less awkward for everyone involved. By mid-morning, David was deep into the demolition work when he heard voices in the hallway. Carl's voice, tense and apologetic, mixed with a woman's voice that carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I specifically requested that all work be completed while I was traveling," the woman was saying. "I have important meetings today, and I cannot have construction noise disrupting my calls." "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but we're already behind schedule from the delays with the imported marble," Carl replied. "If we don't continue today, we'll miss the deadline for your dinner party next weekend." David paused in his work, recognizing the classic catch-22 of dealing with demanding clients. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. He decided to work as quietly as possible and hope for the best. The woman's voice grew closer as she apparently decided to inspect the work herself. David heard her heels clicking on the marble hallway floor before she appeared in the doorway. He looked up briefly and saw Victoria Sterling for the first time. She was probably in her early 30s, with the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive salons and personal trainers. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and she wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than David's monthly grocery budget. But it was her eyes that struck him most. Pale blue and sharp, with the kind of intelligence that came from privilege and the best education money could buy. "How much longer will this take?" she asked, directing the question to Carl but glancing at David with barely concealed irritation. "About 3 more days for this phase, Miss Sterling," Carl answered quickly. Victoria's jaw tightened. "That's unacceptable. I have the mayor's wife visiting on Thursday, and I cannot have my home looking like a construction site." David continued working, trying to remain invisible as the conversation continued above his head. He'd learned long ago that getting involved in these discussions never ended well for the guy holding the tools. "Can we compromise on the hours?" Victoria continued. "Perhaps work could begin later in the morning? I have conference calls with Tokyo starting at 6 a.m. Carl looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, our crew starts early to maximize productivity. Later hours would mean additional costs for overtime." "Fine," Victoria said curtly. "Bill me for the overtime. Just ensure the noise doesn't start before 9 a.m. As she turned to leave, her phone rang. David couldn't help but notice how her entire demeanor changed when she answered. "Hello, Mother," she said, her voice immediately softer, almost vulnerable. She walked away, but David could still hear fragments of the conversation as she moved down the hallway. "Yes, I'm still planning to be there. No, I haven't changed my mind about the foundation. Mother, we've discussed this." The conversation faded, but something in her tone stayed with David. Beneath the imperious exterior, he'd heard something familiar. The weight of expectations. The pressure to be someone you're not sure you want to be. It was a feeling he knew well, though his version came from trying to be both mother and father to Emma while working multiple jobs to keep them afloat. The rest of the morning passed without incident. David worked steadily, making good progress on removing the old fixtures. Around noon, he took a break to eat the sandwich he'd packed, sitting outside on the back patio where the help was apparently allowed to take their meals. The view from the patio was stunning. The property stretched for acres, with perfectly manicured gardens, a tennis court, and what looked like a small lake in the distance. David tried to imagine what it would be like to wake up to this view every morning, to never worry about money, to have every material need met before you even realized you had it. But then he thought about Emma, probably eating her peanut butter and jelly sandwich at school right now, maybe sharing her chips with her best friend Sarah, because Sarah's family was going through a rough patch too. There was something to be said for knowing the value of things, for understanding that everything you had was earned through sweat and sacrifice. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Emma doing great today. Inhaler not needed so far. Don't worry, Papa Bear." David smiled, feeling the familiar mix of relief and guilt that came with being a single parent. Relief that Emma was okay, guilt that he wasn't there to see for himself. He was about to head back inside when he heard shouting from the front of the house, car doors slamming, male voices urgent and angry. David's construction experience had taught him to recognize the difference between normal commotion and something wrong. This was definitely something wrong. He moved quickly around the side of the house, staying low behind the landscaping. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 men in dark clothing had cornered Victoria Sterling beside her silver Mercedes in the circular driveway. One man held her arm roughly while another was trying to force something over her head. The third man was scanning the area, clearly acting as a lookout. Victoria was struggling, trying to scream, but the man holding her had his hand partially covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror, the composed businesswoman from earlier replaced by someone fighting for her life. David's first instinct was to call 911, but his phone was back inside with his tools. His second instinct was to run and get help, but the security office was at the front gate, at least a quarter mile away. By the time he got there and back, Victoria would be gone. His third instinct was the one that would change everything. He looked around for anything he could use as a weapon and spotted a heavy wrench in his tool belt. Without allowing himself to think about the consequences, David stepped out from behind the bushes. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the driveway. "Let her go!" The 3 men spun toward him, and David immediately realized he might have made a terrible mistake. These weren't opportunistic thieves. They moved with the precision of professionals, and the bulges under their jackets suggested they were armed. The lookout man started moving toward David, his hand reaching inside his jacket. David's mind raced. He thought of Emma, waiting for him at home. He thought of how she'd cope if something happened to him, but he also thought of the terror in Victoria's eyes, and how he'd feel for the rest of his life if he walked away. "I said let her go," David repeated, raising the wrench and trying to look more confident than he felt. "Walk away, construction guy," the lookout man called back. "This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," David replied, surprised by his own boldness. "This is America, and nobody gets kidnapped on my watch." What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and adrenaline. The lookout man pulled out a gun, but David was already moving. Years of construction work had given him quick reflexes and strong arms. He threw the wrench as hard as he could, catching the gunman in the shoulder and sending him stumbling backward. The man holding Victoria loosened his grip in surprise, and she broke free, stumbling toward David. The third man, apparently the leader, was shouting orders, but the plan was clearly falling apart. "Run!" David yelled to Victoria, pushing her toward the house. "Get inside and call 911. Instead of running, Victoria grabbed his arm. "My car keys," she gasped. "They're in my purse." The purse was on the ground near the Mercedes, dropped during the struggle. The three men were regrouping, the wounded one still functional despite David's throw. They had seconds before the situation turned even more dangerous. David made another split-second decision. Instead of going for the purse, he grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her toward his pickup truck. "Come on!" They ran across the driveway as shouts erupted behind them. David's keys were in his pocket, thank God. He practically threw Victoria into the passenger seat and jumped behind the wheel. The old Ford's engine turned over once, twice, then roared to life. David had never been more grateful for American automotive engineering. He threw the truck into drive and gunned it down the long driveway as one of the kidnappers fired a shot that spiderwebbed the rear window. Victoria was breathing heavily, her perfect composure completely shattered. "Oh my God," she kept repeating. "Oh my God, oh my God." "It's okay," David said, though his own hands were shaking on the steering wheel. "We're okay. We got out." He was driving fast, but trying to stay in control. The gate at the end of the driveway was closed, but the security booth looked empty. David laid on the horn as he approached, hoping to alert someone, anyone, to what had just happened. The gate began to open automatically as they approached, apparently triggered by the vehicle sensor. David didn't slow down until they were well away from the estate, finally pulling into a shopping center parking lot about 2 miles away. Only then did he allow himself to truly process what had just happened. He'd just helped prevent a kidnapping. He'd put his life on the line for a woman he barely knew, a woman from a completely different world than his own. Victoria was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "Anyone would have done the same thing," David replied, though he wasn't sure that was true. "No," Victoria said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have called 911 and hoped for the best. You risked everything." David's phone was buzzing. He pulled it out to see multiple missed calls from Carl, the project manager. "I should probably call the police," he said. "Yes," Victoria agreed, "but first I need to know something. What's your name?" "David Martinez." "David," she repeated as if testing how it sounded. "I'm Victoria Sterling, though I suppose you already knew that." "I had gathered that, yeah." Victoria almost smiled. "You're very calm for someone who just prevented a kidnapping." David shrugged. "I have an 8-year-old daughter. After dealing with her when she's had too much sugar, armed kidnappers are actually less terrifying." This time Victoria did smile, and David was struck by how different she looked when she wasn't being the imperious businesswoman. "You have a daughter. Emma. She's 8. Smart as a whip and twice as stubborn." The police arrived within minutes of David's call, apparently already dispatched by the estate's security system. What followed were hours of questioning, statements, and paperwork. The kidnappers had escaped, but their abandoned van yielded several clues that suggested this wasn't a random crime. Detective Sarah Washington, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, explained the situation to David and Victoria as they sat in the police station's conference room. "This appears to have been a targeted kidnapping," she said. "These men knew Ms. Sterling's schedule, knew when she'd be vulnerable. We're looking into whether this was financially motivated or if there might be other factors at play." Victoria paled. "Other factors? Your father's business dealings, potential corporate espionage, even political motivations given your family's connections." Detective Washington explained. "We'll need to provide you with security while we investigate." David felt suddenly out of place. This was clearly a world of corporate intrigue and high-stakes danger that he had no business being part of. He started to stand up. "I should get going," he said. "I need to pick up my daughter from school." "Actually, Mr. Martinez," Detective Washington said, "we'd like you to stay available for the next few days. It's possible these men might view you as a threat now that you can identify them." David's stomach dropped. "A threat? I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Unfortunately, criminals don't always see it that way," the detective replied. "We'd recommend you take some precautions." As they left the police station, Victoria walked beside David to his truck. The rear window was still spider-webbed from the gunshot, a stark reminder of how close they'd both come to disaster. "David," Victoria said as he opened his truck door, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," David replied. "I just did what anyone should do." "But you're the only one who did it," Victoria pointed out, "and now you might be in danger because of me." David considered this. The detective's warnings had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. What if these men came after him? What would happen to Emma? "I'll be careful," he said finally. Victoria hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "Can I give you my number? In case you need anything, or if you remember any other details about what happened." David took down her number, though he couldn't imagine a scenario where he'd actually use it. What would they possibly have to talk about once this crisis passed? As he drove home, David tried to process the day's events. This morning, he'd been a construction worker starting a bathroom renovation. Tonight, he was apparently a hero who'd prevented a kidnapping and might now be a target himself. Emma was waiting at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment when he arrived to pick her up. She took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. "Dad? What happened to your truck window?" David looked at the spider-webbed glass and realized he'd have to come up with some explanation that wouldn't terrify his 8-year-old daughter. "Just a little accident at work, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." But as they walked up to their apartment, David wondered if anything in their lives would ever be normal again. And despite the danger, despite the fear, he found himself thinking about Victoria Sterling's smile and wondering what kind of person she really was beneath all that wealth and polish. He was about to find out that Victoria Sterling was thinking the exact same thing about him. The next morning brought a knock on David's door at 7 a.m. He opened it to find a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of flowers and what looked like several shopping bags. "David Martinez?" the man asked. "Yeah, that's me. Delivery from Ms. Victoria Sterling." David signed for the packages, bewildered. Inside, the first bag was a gift certificate to a high-end grocery store, worth more money than David usually spent on food in 2 months. The second bag contained what looked like expensive toys and books for Emma. The card attached to the flowers was handwritten in elegant script. "David, I couldn't sleep last night thinking about what you did for me. Please accept this small token of my gratitude. I also wanted to make sure Emma has everything she needs while you deal with the aftermath of yesterday. You gave me my life back. The least I can do is ensure yours continues without additional hardship. Victoria." David stared at the gifts, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude, yes, but also something that felt uncomfortably like charity. He'd helped her because it was the right thing to do, not because he expected payment. Emma, however, had no such complicated feelings about the situation. She was delighted with the books and the beautifully crafted dollhouse that had been included in her package. "Dad, who's Victoria?" Emma asked, reading the card over his shoulder. "Someone I helped yesterday," David said carefully. "She must really like you to send all this stuff," Emma observed with the brutal honesty of an 8-year-old. Before David could respond, his phone rang. Victoria's number appeared on the screen. "Hello," he answered. David, it's Victoria. I hope you don't mind me calling so early. I wanted to make sure the delivery arrived safely. It did, thank you. But this is too much. I can't accept all this. Please don't refuse them, Victoria said quickly. I know you might feel uncomfortable, but this isn't charity. This is gratitude. There's a difference. David found himself in the awkward position of trying to argue with someone who just sent him more than he earned in a week. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, he said finally, not because I expected anything in return. I know that, Victoria replied, and there was something in her voice that made David pause. That's exactly why I wanted to do this, because you didn't expect it. There was a moment of silence before Victoria continued. David, I have a question for you. It might sound strange, but would you be willing to have coffee with me this afternoon? There's something I'd like to discuss. David's first instinct was to decline. What could they possibly have to discuss? But something in her tone suggested this wasn't just social politeness. Okay, he heard himself saying. What did you have in mind? They arranged to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Birmingham, a compromise location between their two very different worlds. David spent the rest of the morning finishing up some paperwork related to the police investigation and trying not to think about what Victoria Sterling could possibly want to discuss with him. The coffee shop was one of those trendy places with exposed brick walls and baristas who took their craft very seriously. David felt self-conscious in his work clothes, but Victoria had chosen a corner table away from the main crowd, presumably for privacy. She looked different than she had during the kidnapping attempt or even during their first meeting at her house. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, more approachable, though David could still see the underlying tension in her shoulders. Thank you for coming, she said as he sat down. I wasn't sure you would. I'll admit I'm curious about what this is about, David replied. Victoria wrapped her hands around her coffee cup as if seeking warmth. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday, obviously, but I've also been thinking about what you said about your daughter. David tensed slightly. What about her? You mentioned she's asthmatic, that the medication is expensive. Emma's fine, David said quickly, defensive. We manage. I'm sure you do, Victoria said gently. But managing and thriving aren't the same thing, are they? David didn't answer, unsure where this conversation was heading. Victoria leaned forward slightly. David, I want to help. Not just with yesterday's thank you gifts, but really help. I want to set up a fund for Emma's medical expenses. I want to make sure she has everything she needs. No, David said immediately. Absolutely not. Why not? Because... David struggled to find the right words. Because I take care of my daughter. That's what fathers do. I don't need your money. This isn't about what you need, Victoria said. It's about what Emma deserves. Every child deserves to have their medical needs met without their parent having to work 3 jobs. How do you know I work 3 jobs? David asked sharply. Victoria had the grace to look embarrassed. I may have asked Detective Washington about your background. I'm sorry if that seems invasive, but I wanted to understand who had risked their life for me. David felt a flash of anger. So you had me investigated? Not investigated, just I wanted to know more about you, about your situation. My situation is fine, David said, standing up. Emma and I don't need your pity. It's not pity, Victoria said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and lowered it again. David, please sit down. Let me explain. Something in her tone made David pause. He sat back down, but his posture remained tense. When I was growing up, Victoria began, I thought money solved everything. If someone had a problem, you wrote a check. If someone was struggling, you made a donation. It was clean, simple, and it kept me from having to really think about what people actually needed. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Yesterday, when those men grabbed me, I realized that all my money, all my security systems, all my carefully constructed walls hadn't protected me from the thing that mattered most. But you did. You with your old truck and your work clothes and your 8-year-old daughter waiting at home. David remained silent, listening. I've been thinking about what you said about Emma sharing her chips with her friend, whose family is going through a rough patch. When was the last time I shared anything that actually mattered to me? When was the last time I risked something real for someone else? Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I want to help Emma, not because I pity you, but because I admire you, because you've raised a daughter who shares her chips, because you put your life on the line for a stranger, because everything I thought I knew about character and worth got turned upside down yesterday. David felt his anger deflating, replaced by something more complicated. Victoria, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but let me finish, she interrupted gently. I'm not talking about charity. I'm talking about friendship. I'm talking about two people who found themselves in an impossible situation and discovered they had more in common than they expected. What could we possibly have in common? David asked. Victoria smiled sadly. We're both alone. We're both carrying responsibilities that feel too heavy sometimes. We're both trying to figure out how to do right by the people we care about. David considered this. You're alone, but you have everything. I have money, Victoria corrected. That's not the same thing as having everything. I have a mother who calls every day to remind me of my responsibilities to the family foundation. I have board meetings and charity galas and dinner parties where everyone wants something from me. But I don't have anyone who cares whether I'm happy or sad or scared. She paused. Yesterday, when you threw that wrench and put yourself between me and those men, that was the first time in years that someone protected me without expecting anything in return. Do you have any idea what that means to someone like me? David found himself looking at Victoria with new eyes. Beneath the polished exterior, he saw something he recognized. Loneliness. The weight of always having to be strong, always having to have the answers, always having to put everyone else's needs first. So what are you proposing? He asked carefully. Friendship, Victoria said simply. I want to be part of Emma's life, and I want you both to be part of mine, not as charity cases, but as friends, real friends. David thought about Emma, who'd been asking for weeks when she could have a play date with someone new. He thought about the long evenings after she went to bed, when the apartment felt too quiet and the weight of single parenthood felt crushing. He thought about how Victoria had looked when she smiled at his joke about Emma being scarier than armed kidnappers. Emma would like that, he said finally. She's been asking about you since the flowers arrived. Victoria's face lit up with genuine joy. Really? Really? But Victoria, if we're going to be friends, we need to establish some ground rules. Okay. I pay my own way. If we go somewhere together, I pay for Emma and me. If she needs something, I provide it. That's non-negotiable. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded. Understood. And if this friendship is going to work, it has to be real. No more investigations into my background. No more surprise gifts that cost more than my rent. Just normal friendship stuff. I'm not sure I know what normal friendship stuff looks like, Victoria admitted, but I'm willing to learn. David found himself smiling. Well, normal friends have coffee and complain about their problems. Normal friends help each other move furniture. Normal friends let their kids have sleepovers. Emma would be welcome to stay at my house any time, Victoria said eagerly. Actually, I was thinking she might enjoy having you stay at our place sometime. Emma makes excellent pancakes, and our couch is surprisingly comfortable. Victoria stared at him. You'd want me to stay at your apartment? Why not? That's what friends do. For a moment, Victoria looked completely overwhelmed. Then she began to laugh, a sound that was part joy and part relief. David Martinez, she said, I think you're going to change my life. I think you already changed mine, David replied. Over the following weeks, an unlikely friendship began to bloom. Victoria started joining David and Emma for dinner twice a week, initially bringing expensive takeout from trendy restaurants, until David gently insisted that she learn to cook simple meals with them instead. The first time Victoria attempted to make spaghetti in David's small kitchen, she managed to both burn the sauce and undercook the pasta. Emma found this hilarious and appointed herself Victoria's cooking teacher, a role she took very seriously. "You have to stir it, Victoria," Emma explained patiently as she stood on a chair beside the stove. "Dad says cooking is like taking care of people. You have to pay attention and not let things burn." Victoria looked at David over Emma's head, and he saw understanding pass between them. Emma was teaching her more than just cooking. In return, Victoria helped Emma with her homework, particularly math, which had always been David's weak subject. She also introduced Emma to art museums and symphony concerts, experiences that David couldn't have provided on his construction worker's salary. But the real breakthrough came 3 weeks after their first coffee meeting, when Emma had a severe asthma attack in the middle of the night. David was used to handling these emergencies alone. He had Emma's rescue inhaler, knew the routine, knew when to worry and when to stay calm. But this attack was worse than usual, and Emma's breathing wasn't improving as quickly as it should have. At 2 a.m., sitting in the emergency room with Emma hooked up to a nebulizer, David felt the familiar panic of being solely responsible for another person's well-being. That's when his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Couldn't sleep. Thinking about our dinner plans tomorrow. How are you both doing?" Without really thinking about it, David typed back. "At ER with Emma. Asthma attack. She's okay, but might be here a while." Victoria's response came immediately. "Which hospital? I'm on my way." "You don't need to come, it's late. Friends show up, that's what you taught me." Victoria arrived 20 minutes later, still in pajamas with a coat thrown over them, carrying coffee for David and a stuffed elephant for Emma. She didn't make a fuss or ask a lot of questions. She just sat with them, keeping Emma entertained with silly stories while they waited for the doctors to finish their evaluations. "The elephant's name is Trumpet," Victoria told Emma as the nebulizer hissed softly. "He used to live in my garden, but I think he'd be happier living with someone who knows how to take care of friends." Emma hugged the elephant tightly. "Does he get scared sometimes?" "Sometimes," Victoria said, "but he's very brave, just like you." David watched this interaction and felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't the polished businesswoman from the mansion, or even the grateful kidnapping victim from the coffee shop. This was someone who cared enough to show up at 2 a.m. in her pajamas because a friend needed her. When they finally got home at 4 a.m., Emma was exhausted but breathing normally. Victoria helped David get her settled in bed, then lingered in the small living room. "Thank you," David said, "for coming, for staying, for Trumpet." "Thank you for letting me," Victoria replied. "I've never been needed like that before. Really needed, not just wanted for what I could provide." They stood in the dim living room, both exhausted, both aware that something important had just happened. "Victoria," David said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why don't you have kids? I mean, if that's not too personal." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I was engaged once," she said finally, "to someone my parents approved of, someone from the right family, with the right connections. We planned to have children, of course. It was expected." She sat down on David's second-hand couch, looking suddenly fragile. "But when I really thought about it, I realized I didn't know how to love someone unconditionally. I'd never learned how. Everything in my world came with conditions, with expectations, with strings attached. I couldn't imagine bringing a child into that." David sat down beside her. "And now?" Victoria looked toward Emma's bedroom door. "Now I see what real love looks like. I see how you dropped everything to rush her to the hospital, how you stayed calm even though you were terrified, how you put her needs before your own exhaustion, your own fear, your own convenience." She turned to face David. "I see how Emma feels completely safe with you, even when she can't breathe. That's not something money can buy. That's not something you can learn from books or hire consultants to teach you." David felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee Victoria had brought. "You were great with her tonight. Natural. I was terrified I'd say the wrong thing." "The fact that you were worried about saying the wrong thing tells me you said exactly the right things," David replied. Victoria smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "My mother called today. She wants me to attend another fundraising gala next weekend. $500 a plate to raise money for underprivileged children, and everyone will congratulate themselves on their generosity while going home to houses that could fund entire schools." "Are you going?" "I was. It's expected. But sitting here, thinking about Emma sharing her chips with her friend, I keep wondering what would happen if I donated that money directly to families who need it, instead of attending another party where people network over champagne." David considered this. "What would happen? My mother would be horrified. The family name, our social obligations, the importance of being seen supporting the right causes." Victoria's voice took on a mocking tone that suggested she'd heard these phrases many times before. "But what would you want to happen?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I'd want to find more families like yours. Families where parents work multiple jobs but still make time to help with homework. Where children learn to share what little they have. Where love isn't conditional on performance or achievement." "Those families exist," David said. "Probably more than you realize." "I know they do now. I just never knew how to find them before." Victoria stood up, suddenly looking exhausted. "I should go. You need sleep, and Emma needs you rested for tomorrow." As she gathered her coat, David found himself not wanting her to leave. The apartment felt different with her in it. Less lonely, somehow. "Victoria," he said as she reached the door, "what if you didn't go to the gala?" "What do you mean?" "What if you spent that evening doing something else? Something that felt more real?" Victoria paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Like what?" "Emma's school is having a carnival fundraiser next Saturday. Nothing fancy, just games and hot dogs and a cakewalk. But it's for families who can't afford the school supply fees." David wasn't sure why he was inviting her. The school carnival was definitely not Victoria Sterling's usual scene. But something about the way she'd sat with Emma in the hospital, completely present and unworried about her expensive pajamas getting wrinkled, made him think she might actually enjoy it. "You want me to come to a school carnival instead of a society gala?" "I want you to see what community actually looks like," David said. "But only if you want to." Victoria stared at him for a moment, then began to smile. "David Martinez, you continue to surprise me. Is that a yes?" "It's a yes to the carnival and a no to the gala." Her smile widened. "My mother is going to think I've lost my mind." "Maybe you have," David said. "Is that necessarily a bad thing?" Victoria laughed. "You know what? I don't think it is." The next Saturday, Victoria showed up at David's apartment wearing jeans, sneakers, and a Michigan State sweatshirt she'd apparently bought specifically for the occasion. Emma was delighted to have Victoria accompany them to the school carnival, especially when Victoria proved surprisingly competitive at the ring toss game. "You're really good at this," Emma observed as Victoria successfully landed 3 rings in a row. "I played a lot of tennis growing up," Victoria explained. "Apparently good hand-eye coordination transfers to carnival games." David watched Victoria navigate the crowded school gymnasium, talking easily with other parents, helping Emma and her friends with various games, eating a hot dog without worrying about getting mustard on her new sweatshirt. She looked relaxed in a way he'd never seen before. The breakthrough moment came during the cakewalk. Victoria had volunteered to help run the game, calling out numbers as children walked in a circle to music. When the music stopped and a number was called, the child standing on that number got to choose a homemade cake. A little boy named Marcus, whom David recognized as one of Emma's classmates, won a chocolate cake. But instead of keeping it, he immediately walked over to an elderly woman sitting by herself in the corner. "Mrs. Patterson," Marcus said, "my mom sent this cake for you. She said to tell you it's her grandmother's recipe." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the cake. "Tell your mother thank you, sweetheart, and tell her I'll bring the plate back on Monday." Victoria watched this exchange with fascination. "Who is she?" she asked David quietly. "Mrs. Patterson. She's been the school secretary for 30 years. Her husband passed away last year, and she's been struggling a bit. The families here look out for each other." Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching as several other families made excuses to stop by Mrs. Patterson's table, bringing her cups of coffee, including her in conversations, treating her with the kind of casual dignity that said this wasn't charity, but community. "This is what you meant," Victoria said finally. "What?" "When you said I needed to see what community actually looks like. This is people taking care of each other without making a big show of it. Without expecting recognition or tax deductions, or their names on plaques," David nodded. "These families don't have much, but they share what they have, and nobody keeps score." As the evening wound down, Victoria helped with cleanup, stacking chairs and wiping down tables alongside parents she'd just met. David noticed that several people had invited her to other school events, apparently having quickly accepted her as just another parent rather than a wealthy outsider. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the evening's excitement. Victoria was quiet too, but David could sense her thinking. "Penny for your thoughts," he said finally. "I was thinking about something Emma said earlier," Victoria replied. "When we were playing the ring toss, she told me that the best part about winning prizes wasn't keeping them, but giving them to friends who hadn't won anything yet." David glanced in the rearview mirror at his sleeping daughter. "That sounds like Emma. She learned that from you, you know, that generosity, that instinct to share. She didn't learn it from books or lessons. She learned it from watching how you live." David felt the familiar mixture of pride and terror that came with being solely responsible for shaping another human being. "I'm just trying to teach her to be a good person." "You're doing more than that," Victoria said. "You're teaching her that being a good person is more important than being a successful person. That's not a lesson many children learn these days." They drove in comfortable silence for a while before Victoria spoke again. "David, I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me honestly if it's a terrible idea." "Okay. I want to start a foundation, not like the ones my family already supports with board meetings and galas and administrative overhead. I want to start something that directly helps families like the ones we met tonight. Families where parents are working multiple jobs but still can't quite make ends meet." David considered this. "What would that look like?" "I'm not entirely sure yet. Maybe paying for medical expenses, or covering childcare costs so parents can attend school events, or funding after-school programs in neighborhoods that can't afford them. But I want to do it quietly, without fanfare, without expecting gratitude or recognition." Victoria paused, gathering her thoughts. "And I want to ask families like yours what they actually need, instead of assuming I know what's best for them." "That's not a terrible idea," David said carefully. "But why are you asking me?" "Because I want you to help me run it." David nearly swerved off the road. "What?" "I'm serious. I have the money, but you understand the community. You know what real need looks like because you've lived it. You know the difference between helping and enabling because you've had to navigate that line with Emma." David's mind was racing. "Victoria, I'm a construction worker. I don't know anything about running a foundation. I'm a rich woman who just learned what community looks like at a school carnival," Victoria replied. "I don't think traditional qualifications are what matter here. They were pulling into David's apartment complex now. Victoria helped carry a sleeping Emma upstairs, and they settled her into bed without waking her. In the quiet of the living room, David found himself seriously considering Victoria's proposal. What would this mean practically, he asked. It would mean leaving construction work, Victoria said. It would mean a regular salary, benefits, the security of knowing you could take care of Emma without working 3 jobs. David felt a flutter of hope, quickly followed by suspicion. This isn't charity, is it? You offering me a job because you feel sorry for me? Victoria sat down on the couch and looked him straight in the eye. David, in the past 2 months you've saved my life, taught me what real friendship looks like, shown me what genuine community means, and helped me understand the difference between wealth and worth. If anyone should be worried about charity, it's me. She leaned forward. I'm not offering you a job because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering you a partnership because I've learned that money without wisdom is just waste, and you have the wisdom I need. David thought about Emma, about the constant worry of making ends meet, about the guilt of missing school events because he had to work. He thought about the families he'd met tonight, good people struggling with the same challenges he faced every day. If I said yes, he said carefully, how would we make sure we're actually helping people and not just making ourselves feel better? Victoria smiled. That's exactly the right question, and the fact that you asked it first tells me we might actually be able to do this right. They talked until nearly midnight, sketching out ideas, sharing stories about the families they'd met, discussing the difference between charity that empowers and charity that creates dependency. By the time Victoria left, they had the framework for something that felt genuinely different. A month later, the Sterling Martinez Family Foundation held its first meeting in David's living room. Emma helped serve cookies she'd baked with Victoria, while David and Victoria reviewed applications from local families. The foundation's approach was simple. They asked families what they needed, provided it without conditions or paperwork, and followed up to see how things were going. No galas, no publicity, no administrative overhead, just direct help from one family to another. Their first recipient was Marcus's family, the little boy who'd given his cake to Mrs. Patterson at the school carnival. Marcus's mother had been struggling to pay for childcare during her nursing school classes. The foundation covered 6 months of childcare costs, allowing her to complete her degree and secure a job that would support her family long-term. Their second recipient was Mrs. Patterson herself, who needed help with home repairs after a storm damaged her roof. Instead of writing a check, Victoria and David organized a weekend work party with volunteers from Emma's school. Victoria learned to use a nail gun. David supervised the more complex repairs, and Emma helped by bringing everyone lemonade and sandwiches. As word spread quietly through the community, more families reached out. A single father whose car had broken down, preventing him from getting to his second job. A grandmother raising her grandchildren who needed help with school supplies and clothes. A family whose medical bills had forced them to choose between medication and groceries. Each case taught David and Victoria something new about the complexity of poverty and the simple power of human connection. They learned that sometimes the most valuable thing they could provide wasn't money, but time, attention, and the message that someone cared. 6 months after the kidnapping attempt that had brought them together, David and Victoria were working late in the foundation's new office, a modest space in downtown Birmingham that felt more like a living room than a corporate headquarters. Emma was doing homework at a corner desk that Victoria had set up specifically for her after-school visits. The foundation had become as much a part of Emma's routine as it had David and Victoria's lives. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her math homework, "Ashley at school asked me if Victoria is your girlfriend." David nearly choked on his coffee. Victoria, who was reviewing applications at the desk across from him, went very still. "What did you tell her?" David asked carefully. "I told her Victoria is our family," Emma said matter-of-factly. Not like my mom was, but still family, like Mrs. Rodriguez's family, even though she's not related to us. David and Victoria exchanged a look over Emma's head. In the past 6 months, Victoria had become a constant presence in their lives. She had a key to their apartment, kept clothes in their spare dresser drawer, and knew Emma's schedule as well as David did. They'd fallen into a routine that felt natural, comfortable, right. But they'd never discussed what exactly their relationship was becoming. "That's a good way to put it," David said finally. "Victoria is definitely family." Emma nodded and returned to her homework, apparently satisfied with this explanation. But David could see Victoria smiling to herself as she went back to her applications. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, David and Victoria found themselves alone in the foundation office, finishing up the day's work. "Family, huh?" Victoria said, not looking up from her paperwork. "Emma calls it like she sees it," David replied. "Does that bother you?" "No," Victoria said softly. "It doesn't bother me at all." They worked in comfortable silence for a while before Victoria spoke again. "David, can I tell you something?" "Always." "When those men grabbed me that day, I thought about all the things I'd never done, all the relationships I'd never had, all the ways I'd wasted the privilege and opportunities I'd been given." She set down her pen and looked at him. "I thought I was going to die without ever having really lived, without ever having been important to someone in a way that mattered." David felt his chest tighten. "Victoria, let me finish," she said gently. "When you threw that wrench and put yourself between me and those men, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a chance to discover what life could actually be like, what it feels like to be part of a real family, to do work that matters, to be valued for who I am rather than what I can provide." She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the street below where a few late-night diners were still open, their warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. "Emma asked me last week what I wished for when I was her age," Victoria continued, "and I realized that I never wished for anything. I just accepted whatever path was laid out for me. College, career, marriage to someone appropriate, children who would carry on the family legacy. I never asked myself what I actually wanted." David joined her at the window. "What do you want now?" Victoria turned to face him, and David was struck by how different she looked from the polished businesswoman he'd first met. Her hair was in a messy ponytail. She was wearing one of David's old Michigan sweatshirts, and there was paint under her fingernails from helping Emma with an art project earlier. "I want this," she said simply. "I want to come home to Emma asking about my day. I want to help her with homework and worry about whether she's eating enough vegetables. I want to work on something that matters with someone I respect. I want to be part of a family that chose each other rather than being stuck with each other." David felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of feelings he'd been pushing aside for months. "Victoria," he said carefully, "are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that I love you," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the admission. "I love you, and I love Emma, and I love the life we've built together. I'm saying that if you're open to it, I'd like to make this official." David stared at her, his mind racing. 6 months ago, he'd been a single father working construction, barely making ends meet. Now he was running a foundation with a woman who'd become the center of his world, a woman who loved his daughter as much as he did. "What about your family?" he asked. "Your mother, the expectations, all of that?" Victoria smiled. "My mother is slowly coming around to the idea that I might know what's best for my own life, and the foundation has actually impressed some of the family friends. Apparently, quietly effective philanthropy is becoming trendy among the wealthy set." "And what about Emma? Have you thought about what it would mean to be her stepmother?" "I've thought about it every day for months," Victoria replied. "I know I can't replace her mother, and I wouldn't want to. But I'd like the chance to be the kind of parent I never had. The kind who shows up at school carnivals and sits in emergency rooms and teaches cooking lessons in small kitchens." David reached for her hands. marveling at how right this felt, despite how impossible it should have been. "You know this won't be easy," he said. "We come from completely different worlds." "We come from different circumstances," Victoria corrected, "but we want the same things. We want Emma to be happy and healthy. We want to do work that matters. We want to build something real together." She paused, suddenly looking vulnerable. "Unless I'm misreading this completely, unless you don't feel the same way." David answered by kissing her, a soft, tentative kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility. When they broke apart, Victoria was smiling, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face. "I love you too," David said. "I have for months. I just couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between our worlds." "There is no gap," Victoria replied. "There's just us and Emma and the life we're building together." A year later, David and Victoria were married in a small ceremony in the backyard of their new home, a modest house in Emma's school district that they'd bought together. Emma served as maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd helped pick out and carrying a bouquet of flowers from their own garden. The guest list included Mrs. Rodriguez, Detective Washington, several families from the foundation, and even Carl, the project manager from Victoria's mansion renovation, who had become an unlikely friend. Victoria's mother attended, still somewhat bewildered by her daughter's choices, but unable to argue with her obvious happiness. The Sterling Martinez Family Foundation had grown beyond anything they'd initially imagined, helping dozens of families while maintaining its core principle of quiet, direct assistance. Emma had become the foundation's unofficial junior ambassador, helping identify families at her school who might need support and serving as a bridge between different worlds. During the wedding reception, held in the same modest backyard with folding tables and homemade decorations, Emma gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "When I was little," she said, speaking into the microphone with the confidence of a child who'd grown up feeling heard and valued, "I used to wish for a mom, but I didn't know what kind of mom I wanted because I didn't remember mine very much." She looked at Victoria, who was sitting at the head table with David, both of them hanging on every word. "Then Victoria came to our family, and I learned that the best kind of mom isn't someone who tries to be perfect. It's someone who shows up when you're scared, who helps you with math even when she's tired, and who teaches you that it's okay to be yourself, even if yourself is different from other people." Emma paused, her 8-year-old wisdom shining through. "Victoria teaches me that being rich isn't about having money. It's about having people who love you and work you care about and enough food to share with your friends. And now our whole family is rich in all the ways that matter." As applause filled the backyard, David reached for Victoria's hand and squeezed it gently. She squeezed back, tears streaming down her face. "How did we get so lucky?" she whispered. David looked around at their assembled friends and family, at Emma beaming with pride, at the simple decorations and homemade cake that represented everything they'd learned about what really mattered. "I don't think it was luck," he replied. "I think it was choice. We chose to see the best in each other. We chose to build something real instead of something easy. We chose love over fear." Victoria nodded, understanding. The kidnapping attempt that had brought them together seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 2 years. Sometimes the most profound changes in life came not from gradual growth, but from moments of crisis that forced you to discover who you really were and what you really valued. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, David found himself standing in their backyard with Victoria and Emma, watching the last of the cleanup and marveling at how perfectly ordinary and extraordinarily meaningful their life had become. "What do you think happens next?" Victoria asked, leaning against David's shoulder while Emma chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I think we keep doing what we're doing," David replied. "We take care of each other, we help other families, and we remember that the best things in life aren't things at all." Emma ran up to them, breathless and glowing with happiness. "Can we make s'mores now?" Mrs. Rodriguez brought marshmallows. "Of course we can," Victoria said, reaching out to smooth Emma's hair. "That's what families do." As they gathered around the small fire pit David had built, roasting marshmallows and telling stories, David reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A moment of courage during a crisis had led to friendship, which had led to love, which had led to family, which had led to a life none of them could have imagined, but all of them had chosen. The foundation continued to grow, helping hundreds of families over the years while maintaining its core values of dignity, direct assistance, and community connection. Emma grew up understanding that privilege was a responsibility, not a right, and that the best way to honor good fortune was to share it with others. And David and Victoria learned that the most profound transformations often begin with the simplest acts of human decency. A father protecting a stranger, a woman learning to see beyond her privilege, a child teaching adults what really matters. Their story became legend in certain circles, not because it was extraordinary, but because it proved that ordinary people making extraordinary choices could change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. In the end, David Martinez didn't just prevent a kidnapping, he prevented a life from being wasted. And Victoria Sterling didn't just escape her captors. She escaped the prison of a life lived for everyone except herself. Together, they discovered that heroism isn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It's about showing up, speaking up, and choosing love over fear every single day. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful transformation of all. Because when we choose to see the humanity in others, when we choose to act with courage and compassion, when we choose to build bridges instead of walls, we don't just change our own stories. We change the world, one relationship at a time. David's act of bravery that Tuesday morning didn't just save a life. It revealed a truth that our divided world desperately needs to remember, that our shared humanity is stronger than our differences, that character matters more than circumstances, and that the most profound connections often form between people who seem to have nothing in common, but discover they have everything that matters. This is the story of two people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chose to build something beautiful together. But more than that, it's a reminder that every day we all have the opportunity to be heroes in someone else's story. We just have to be brave enough to act when the moment comes. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, acting with courage doesn't just change someone else's life. It changes our own in ways we never thought possible.